Hello and welcome. You are listening to Party Animals. Party Animals is a political podcast, and the podcast will be focusing on the 2016 presidential election, Indiana politics, political behavior, and politicians. This week's episode deals with the vice presidential debate and also the role of the vice presidency. So let's begin with introductions first. Introductions just say your name, where you're from, and what you're studying here. And if you aren't studying anything here, say what you teach. So Jordan, you're up first.
Hi, I'm Professor Jordan Lysing. I'm an assistant professor of political science here at St. Joseph's College.
I'm Justin Hayes. I'm a fourth-year psychology student, and I'm from Brownsburg, Indiana.
I'm Nathaniel Wade. I'm a senior. I'm a political science major from Indianapolis, Indiana.
I'm Jordan DeLong. I am a professor of psychology here, assistant professor of psychology in my first year, and I'm from Granger, Indiana.
I'm Justin Meredith. I'm a sophomore here at St. Joseph's College and a double major in political science and philosophy.
We're all from Indiana, guys.
Way to represent everybody. Hoosiers?
Did that hurt as a Kentucky?
A little bit. A little bit. That hurt just a little bit.
You boil her down.
That's right.
Ban her up.
So let's see. The vice presidential debate was Monday, and this was the first.
Tuesday.
It was Tuesday? Man, it's been a long week. The vice presidential debate was Tuesday, and it featured Governor Mike Pence of Indiana and Senator Tim Kaine. I think that's what he is. Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia.
Something really white bread, yeah.
So this was the first and only vice presidential debate. So I kind of want to get just your thoughts on it before we start talking about it. So Nate, first question to you. What are your overall thoughts on how the debate went?
I think Governor Pence was more calm and collected during it. Senator Kaine was kind of riled up. He didn't seem as comfortable with the format. He was interrupting constantly when Governor Pence was trying to speak. He seemed more like an attack dog, I guess, for the Clinton campaign. He attacked Trump a lot, where Governor Pence kind of shot the attacks away, I guess. I don't really think Governor Pence really tried to step up and defend his running mate. Overall, I think kind of Pence took it away. He seemed more prepared, like he knew what was going to happen coming into it, whereas Kaine kind of just seemed like he was just going in blind.
Jordan, you've been nodding your head. Jordan DeLong, you've been nodding your head. So
I mean,
thoughts?
I definitely agree that personally, right, Tim Kaine came off as a bit of a bully. Right, he was interjecting a lot. He was more aggressive, but I think it depends on what you think the point of this debate was in the first place. Do you think it was a debate about whether you like Tim Kaine or our blessed governor more, or do you feel? I was told I shouldn't swear. Or do you think that this was a proxy fight? Right? Because do you think that the goal of the vice president is to go in and make a case for themselves, or is it to go in and try to do as much damage to the main candidate as possible? And I definitely think Kaine came out swinging, and he was even quoted beforehand saying that the less he talks about Tim Kaine, the better off this is going to be.
Jordan?
And I think that both candidates had two very different ideas of what this debate was about for them.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed as though Pence was there to promote Pence. He was not there to promote the ticket. He was there to promote Pence conservatism, not necessarily promote Trump conservatism. Whereas, there's a interesting article that was on the Washington Post, and I tend to agree that the thing that Tim Kaine wanted to do was to basically put a lot of doubt on whether or not Trump was fit to be the man in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he was able to do that because of how Pence really just either totally dismissed everything that Kane was mentioning, or even just really just not even defending it in a way that was even coherently sound. And so from a standpoint, I think that what I feel as though, what I got from looking at social media, from a lot of other things, is that the effect of the debate was that people are having a lot of buyer's remorse when it comes to the Republican nominee. They're just like, damn, what the heck did we just do?
Justin Hayes, well, your thoughts on it?
Well, I really like the point about it being a proxy war, and I think when that really came into view was when both candidates were asked about the Syrian war, and immediately Tim Kaine jumps to Trump's taxes, about whether or not he can support the troops because he did not pay his taxes in Tim Kaine's mind. And Pence immediately just deflects it with a chuckle about, have you even taken audit or something, or have you ever taken something about tax class? And basically it turned into talking about the Syrian war and how each candidate thought to whether Trump supports the troops. And of course, Pence comes back of Trump loves the troops, Trump supports the veterans, he's going to make our military stronger. And went from talking about the issue at hand to each the attack dog and the deflection. And I think that kind of summed up the debate in itself.
Justin? Yes.
I think Mike Pence was really put on the ticket to try to bridge Donald Trump back to regular conservatives, not super right-wingers. And I think what Senator Kaine was doing was going after the differences that Pence and Trump have, because there are a lot of major differences on major policy issues such as trade, such as how to deal with the LGBTQ community, and that Trump and Pence disagree on. So I think Tim Kaine was really trying to drive a wedge in the Republican Party there.
So now that we gave a little overview of what the debate was actually about, let's go into each of the candidates' performance. Let's start off with Senator Tim Kaine. So I guess Justin Meredith, we'll direct this question to you. How do you think Senator Tim Kaine did in his first vice presidential debate? Well, his first, let's say, national debate.
I think some might argue that he was kind of all over the place, really not as calm as Mike Pence was, but that's what he was there to do. He was there to come out and attack. So if you're looking at it on what his mission was going into the debate and what he accomplished by the end of it, I think he had a very successful debate night.
Jordan?
I'll take the opposite view. If you don't take into account his mission, if you just understand what, just look at it from what it is, a debate between two people. Hillary Clinton came off during the presidential debate as she rehearsed just enough. She seemed like things came off the top of her head, but she seemed like she knew what she was talking about. Whereas Tim Kaine, on the other hand, was very much almost rehearsed way too much. There was, I think at one point, he had a one-liner and Pence said in reply, "Oh, how long did it take for you to rehearse that?" And so it was one of those things where if you discount the mission that he had, which I think is important in this, that you kind of have to disregard in some ways the performance itself. But the performance itself was something that was almost way too rehearsed, to the point where things were happening that probably he didn't expect to happen, and he couldn't necessarily react in the way that he probably should have.
Does anyone else want to touch on Tim Kaine's performance?
Well, I think he went back to what he knew. I mean, so his career before this was as a lawyer, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's what he was doing, right? As he was going through, he basically was saying, here are the facts, explain yourself. And when they can't explain himself, he knew that was a soundbite. It was exactly what Justin was saying, where you go through and if you have an attack where you say Donald Trump doesn't pay taxes and that doesn't support the troops, that's something we haven't heard before. But when Pence comes back and says he loves the troops are great, that's not anything that anyone is ever going to remember. So the things that stick out are some of those attacks. And it came off as rude during the debate, but I think he understood that a vice presidential debate is not exactly going to be breaking Super Bowl, right, viewership ratings, right? I think he understood that the way this was going to be fought was in the news afterwards, or even in the type of videos that the Clinton campaign put out afterwards. I think he understood This was a soundbite fight. It wasn't necessarily something that people were going to sit down and watch the whole thing.
Justin?
I think it's interesting that in the presidential debate itself, Hillary was the one who was calm and cool and would deflect the charges, I guess, levied against her by Trump. And then in the vice presidential debate, it was reversed, where Pence was the calm and cool one who was able to deflect the attacks from the Democratic vice president. And it kind of flip-flopped, like Pence was the cool one to his presidential ticket being the one who's always levying the attacks and comes off as the one who's brash, where now Kane, the vice president of the Democratic Party, is the one who's seen as brash from this result.
I know after the vice presidential debate, a lot of people were talking about how Tim Kaine would always cut Mike Pence off and would always throw jabs at Mike Pence. Do you think that worked for Tim Kaine and the Clinton campaign? Or do you think it worked against them? Because they've been going out saying how Donald Trump interrupts people and how he was interrupting people. But Tim Kaine actually interrupted Mike Pence more, I think it was 68 times in the debate, more than Trump did to Clinton during their first presidential debate. So anyone have thoughts on that?
I kind of, like, the major debate kind of gold standard, right, is where you talk about kind of Kennedy looking younger, right, a televised debate versus a radio debate. And I honestly believe we're getting into a point in time where we're going to be saying, oh, people watch the entire thing, right? I think that if you were to poll people who watched the debate live versus people who read about it or saw snippets on social media afterwards,
They're going to respond differently.
they're going to respond differently. And what do you think is more pervasive now? Do you think people are going to fire up network TV and watch, a couple hours of debate, or do you think that they're going to watch it on their phone, over cereal in the morning? And I think that that's our new difference. That's how media is changing for us.
Jordan?
I think what mattered more was not how Tim Kaine treated Pence, but how both Pence and Kaine treated the moderator. If you look at both of them, they both, just ramrod spoke over her whenever she tried to get them to, come back to focus. Whenever she was trying to ask a question, they would interrupt. And I think that turned off people more so than Kaine interrupting Pence. I know at least it turned me off. I think after, the first 15 minutes of, we're going to just run right over the female moderator, I'm just like, I have some better stuff to do than this. And so I think that a lot of people were turned more so off by their complete disregard of the moderator, more so than their disregard for each other.
Well, Jordan brought up a good point about the moderator. What are your thoughts on that? It seems like she didn't control the debate at all. It seems like they were just going back and forth for each other, and they were going back and forth for a long time. Justin, how do you think she did as moderator?
I don't know if it was so much about that she did a poor job as they did a poor job. I think it is their job as professionals in the political field to understand and have a basic knowledge of how a debate should work and how you should treat a moderator. And I think throughout the debate, they just threw that out the window. I don't think it was so much her fault that they weren't under control as it was their own.
Justin, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it partially is about respecting the moderator, not thinking you're above him or her, but also I think maybe we just need a moderator who can command the room or command the candidates, but it's hard to do when you have people who have larger-than-life personalities such as Trump, and when they feel like they need to get in every single point of attack that they can. It doesn't matter whether it's a man or a woman, they're going to usually get talked over, and if people disrespect them, it's because they're constantly on the attack, and they think that they don't need to really respect it because, A, the people that they're trying to win over, they don't really care whether they interrupt them or not, maybe, and B, I guess maybe there's not that strong pushback from the moderator, at least from the two presidential debates so far. I haven't seen a strong pushback against them for that.
Yes, Nate?
Kind of going off what Justin Meredith said, I don't really think she had much of a chance. Like, she tried to interject sometimes and bring back order, but the candidates just kept going, and kind of what Jordan brought up, they just kind of bombarded her. They what every attempt she would make to bring order back to whatever the question was at hand, they would just keep attacking each other. Especially like Senator Kane would say something, and then Governor Pence would completely shoot that down. Oh, this didn't happen, and they'd get so far off topic, and then the what was it, Elaine tried to bring it back, and it was too far gone. She was just getting overrun constantly. There was no respect there or anything.
Justin, I see you had a point you wanted to make.
Yeah, I think another thing is that the moderator probably didn't expect for a vice presidential debate to be this, what's the word I'm looking for? Loud, I guess. I think with Hillary and Trump, everyone kind of expected them to be at each other's throats, kind of not really organized, not really respecting the moderator. But in the vice presidential debate, I don't think anyone expected Senator Kane or Governor Pence to come out like that.
I was going to have to say, I saw it and I was pretty shocked because within the first 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes of the debate, Tim Kaine was right there cutting Mike Pence off on his answers. And Mike Pence was, what I think it looked like Mike Pence was kind of shocked, saying, "What, Tim Kaine? What? I'm surprised you came prepared and you're, ready to battle me on this. Let me talk." There was a lot of things, a lot of points when they were just going back and forth. So I guess, we can switch it now to Pence's performance. Just overall thoughts on how he did. I know there was a couple comments that Pence made that got the media kind of.
Yeah, we can't. You mean we can't whip out that
The
Mexican thing again?
Yeah, there you go again with that Mexican thing. What do you guys think about that comment? I mean, when I heard it, I was like, okay, Mike Pence, that's kind of shocking.
The one thing that I saw on Twitter was Patton Oswalt saying the Archer writers are going wild right now. And it's just you're as soon as I saw that, I was just oh. You really you said that, didn't you? And you probably have no idea what sort of crap you're going to get yourself into for that. But
I know I saw on Twitter, I think right after that comment was made, I go on Twitter and one of my friends tweeted or retweeted a tweet saying, "Oh, there you go again with that Mexican thing again," saying that illegal immigrants or immigrants pay more in taxes than Donald Trump. So, does anyone, Nate, what's your kind of scope on Mike Pence's performance on this debate?
I mean, kind of like I said earlier, I think stylistically he kind of took it. He was more calm and collected. Every time I've seen him speak, he seems like a more level-headed politician. Like, he doesn't seem to get too riled up or too animated like his running mate does. There's a lot of times where there is bait thrown out by Senator Kane, and he chose to ignore it or to not take it. I don't think he had a whole lot of content that was good, or he didn't. I don't think, from what I saw, I think it was on CNN, one of the commentators brought up the fact that Governor Pence took the night, but Senator Kane took the week because of I think it was what Jordan brought up, the lasting effect of the sound bites that were brought up by Senator Kane. Governor Pence didn't really produce any of those for his ticket.
Except for that Mexican
Except
thing.
for that one, and that was
which was probably
backfire.
totally unintended.
That was probably not the one he would like.
The one thing that I noticed was, stylistically, sure, he was calm, collected, that sort of thing. Yeah, great. But when it came to actually answering questions, I don't think he actually answered a single question he was ever asked.
No.
He went to some either discussion of Hillary Clinton and how she's terrible for America, and really never actually spoke about what the question was actually asking. I mean, if you turned that into a drinking game, you'd be dead. It's one of those things where it makes me sad whenever I think about, public discourse when people don't answer questions. It's one of those things where it frustrates me, but at the same time, it's just like, oh, dude, please just stop it.
I think it harkens back, though, to the question of what is a vice presidency supposed to be in these contexts? Because I know for Obama, Joe Biden, right, what he's been to the presidency has been a slightly more human face. Obama is very stoic, right? That's why we have Key and Peele sketches about translators, right? I mean, he's been very stoic and very reserved, and then Joe Biden's the guy that can go out and get
That's
angry.
a bunch of malarkey, yeah.
Right. He can, stomp on the podium. He can talk about Purple Hearts, right? He can go out and do that. And I think that's what Hillary was looking for, right, in Kane. Now, Pence was a very different type of pick, right? He wasn't picked to be an attack dog, right? He was picked to look like the sane kind of straight-laced, politician that you can count on. And I think he did that. It's just that in this particular format, I think that attack dog comes off as more memorable, right, than stable. And I think that's precisely why, I think even before they were picked, I think people knew roughly how this debate was going to go.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about if the vice presidential debate does or doesn't matter. We have an article here by the New Yorker where John Cassidy ultimately says that it doesn't matter in this election, that the vice presidential debate does not matter. Your guys' thoughts on this? I know for me, I would have to say that this might have been one of the most important vice presidential debates we have had.
I could not disagree harder.
Just because of the candidates we have on both parties. They are highly disliked in both parties by their own party and by the other's party. So I know for me, especially, I was seeing this debate and I was like, all right, guys, can we just start over again? Or, we don't even have to start over. Let's just flip the ticket. I think if we flip flip the names around, I think that'll work out for us.
If you, I saw some polling today that they had some hypotheticals where if you have a matchup between Hillary Clinton and Mike Pence, 1 point difference. I think Hillary Clinton wins by about it's 47-46, with Hillary having a 1 point advantage. If you go with Tim Kaine and Donald Trump, it's a 15-point difference. Tim Kaine wins if the election were held today and if that were the ticket, or that were the choices. So what I find really interesting about this is that I think vice presidential debates, at least, they are there to make sure that the person that is in the second spot are, for one, that if something happens, God forbid, to the person that is elected, they're able to fit the shoes that they have to fill. That's about it. There's not really anything that's going to change much of anything about a vice, as long as they aren't necessarily, crazier than, I don't know, Dan Quayle or your Sarah Palin's, that sort of thing. That's where they're trying to make sure that they aren't that.
Well, and that's where I wanted to go. That's within my lifetime. I feel the most important vice presidential debate has been Sarah Palin, because that was such a radical, different style choice.
Mm-hmm.
And we were all wondering, is this man a genius, or has he made a tactical error, right, by selecting a firebrand to offset his old white man image, get somebody who's younger, who's passionate? And I think that moment was one where the vice presidential debate really mattered, because it wasn't just about that, it was about McCain's judgment, right, in picking a vice president. And I think that's part of where this matters too, is what is the next part of this? Like, why did you select this person, and did it make sense? And I think in Palin's case, I think it hurt. I think picking somebody that couldn't perform hurt, right? John McCain more than if he just didn't have a vice president.
Justin Meredith, thoughts?
Just to add to the John McCain and Sarah Palin instance, a 2010 study by Stanford University noted that when John McCain picked Sarah Palin as his running mate, he lost 1.6 percentage points, and that roughly estimated to 2.1 million votes in the actual election.
And I think that if he had come off as maybe even just picking somebody straight and fair and down the middle, and I feel like that's kind of what Pence is in this situation. I think that he's doesn't taste bad.
Justin, I saw you shaking your head. What do you think about the role of the vice presidential debate?
I think it is, on one part, it's a proxy war, at least in this presidential election. Like Jordan said, it was a proxy war. But also, I do agree that it's to check to make sure that who they picked as the presidential nominee is stable. And I think with Pence especially, he does come off as a calm and cool opposite to Trump, who is, of course, we all know how Trump is. But I think we're all from Indiana.
No, we
here.
don't. What are you talking about?
We're all from Indiana here. We have that bad taste in our mouth even with Pence. And I think people who aren't from Indiana, maybe they don't have that same bad taste in their mouth. They recognize him as the fundamental, the evangelical, just strictly traditional Republican. And I think that does help because it balances out the radicalism of Trump.
Nate, thoughts? Does the vice presidential debate matter? What is your take on this?
Kind of like, I mean, I think it matters to a point. I think Jordan brought it up about how it's kind of seeing, God forbid, of course, if the president were to die or something happened to him where the 25th Amendment might have to be invoked, who's going to be in charge? Like, I think that's the major factor, in my opinion at least, of why it's important, because we don't want like Sarah Palin, who claims she can see Russia from her house. I don't know if I feel comfortable with her being the next president, if God forbid. To that extent, I think it is important, but kind of like other Jordan brought up, it's a proxy war. Seems to be what the main purpose of it is.
I think those sound bites are lethal,
Yeah.
right? Seize
Yeah.
Russia from her house, binders full of
Yeah.
women, and possibly now that Mexican thing.
Yeah.
Because people are going to remember this come November. Are they going to remember carefully laid out policy?
I don't think so.
I think only the
And-
wonkiest of wonks will remember
And I would tend to that this vice presidential debate wasn't necessarily important just because look at who you have running. It's basically you have a jar of mayonnaise versus a piece of white bread. They're totally bland and basically safe picks, whereas Sarah Palin is just this kind of out there character from Alaska. Yeah,
But they're safe in different ways.
yeah,
Right? I mean, they're very strategic. You don't necessarily need something to supplement what you already have. You need somebody to complement what you aren't.
yeah.
And I think in some cases, the Trump-Pence ticket is almost better suited, as they are so different. But you're absolutely right. It's not hard to drive a wedge between these people that don't seem to have the same ideological center.
Let's kind of talk about the vice presidential picks. I'm always curious to hear everyone's response to this answer, but do you think Tim Kaine was a good choice for Clinton, or do you think there was someone else out there? Think back in August, or in July actually, when Hillary Clinton was going to name her VP. Was there someone that you guys were hoping for her to pick instead of Tim Kaine?
It's not somebody that I like, but somebody who I believed would have been a complete checkmate. If she would have gone across the aisle and picked somebody like Kasich to be her vice presidential running mate, that would have been the end.
Yeah,
That would have been
she
the
would have
end
locked
of
up
the
the
election.
entire. Yeah,
But obviously that didn't happen. I think people also were interested in someone like Elizabeth Warren, right on the ticket. Those were both things that I was slightly
Yeah.
more excited for, and I basically was going Tim Kaine because he speaks Spanish, and he's a safe pick.
I was thinking for myself. I was thinking kind of some of the secretaries we have. Secretary Julian Castro, he's Hispanic. He used to be the mayor of Houston.
yeah.
And then the other one was Secretary of Labor Tom Perez. He has been he was a lawyer. What kind of lawyer was he?
Well, he's Secretary of Labor.
Secretary,
and
he was I think it was a human rights or
I think so.
something about like a justice lawyer, something like that, which would have helped, I think, Clinton out with the minority groups. Do you think she missed an opportunity there if picking a Hispanic?
I think, at least in my from what I can see, I don't think that she had too much of a problem with the minority vote. Let's face it.
Trump
It-
gave it to her.
Yeah, it's, when you talk about, Mexicans being, rapists and drug dealers, and you basically say to the black community, you all live on one street, that sort of thing in Chicago. It's kind of hard to have, black voters and Hispanic voters voting for that. But I think that the thing is that I think that Tim Kaine was probably, at least at the time, was the best choice. I think that if she wanted to really shore up the Bernie Sanders voters, she would have chosen somebody like Elizabeth Warren, maybe somebody else who was more progressive than she is. But I think that she wasn't at the time afraid that they were going to leave her as much as we're kind of thinking that they might right now. I don't think that there is going to be that much of a chance, but at the time she was hedging her bets, saying, "Look, the Bernie Sanders voters, they're not really going to leave us yet, unless there's some sort of October surprise, which there hasn't been yet." And so right now, I think he was probably the best pick.
Justin.
Well, I do agree that Tim Kaine was the safe pick. I think it would have been enticing to consider, at least I thought, Elizabeth Warren as the VP because, the battle between her and Bernie Sanders, she had to go up against the young millennials of our generation who wanted someone who was more progressive, who was kind of the people's champion of the young and other people who were marginalized. And I think Elizabeth Warren, she does a good job. She has done a good job of that throughout her career, especially with women. And she has been constantly on the attack of Donald Trump throughout this whole election, even though she hasn't played a major part in helping Hillary Clinton. I think it would have been interesting, but maybe it would have also helped secure the people who left once Bernie Sanders lost in the primaries if they would have had a progressive person on the ticket, because Tim Kaine doesn't exactly speak to people our age, whereas Elizabeth Warren, she probably would have, spoken a little more to millennials.
Justin, I want to get your thoughts on Tim Kaine. Good choice, bad choice. Do you have someone else in mind if you were Clinton's campaign manager?
If it was me personally, just because this is who I wanted to see on the Democratic ticket, I probably would have picked Martin O'Malley. But that's just me personally. I think Tim Kaine was a very safe choice. I think Clinton has a lot of minorities locked up, and when she was picking a vice president, she was almost trying to steal a couple Republican votes. And I think in order to do that, I think picking a white male kind of helped her ticket present itself better. If she would have went with two minorities, I think that would have been a clear cut that Republicans wanted to swing over to her. But I think by picking a stereotypical politician, I think that helped her ticket in the long run.
So you said Martin O'Malley. Why Governor O'Malley? Why did you want him?
Governor O'Malley, I felt like, was really in touch with millennials, even though they didn't see it. They saw Bernie Sanders as a socialist, and they really supported that. But Martin O'Malley didn't talk about things that he didn't fully understand. He didn't really talk about things like foreign policy. He really just wanted to fix the system of how candidates get money into their campaigns. He talked about the small issues that are still really important in America, but no one really sees them. He wanted to bring light to those.
Let's move on to Mike Pence. If he was a good choice. Nate, what are your thoughts, Mike Pence? I know the last couple days for Donald Trump, it was Mike Pence, Chris Christie, or Newt Gingrich. Do you think Newt or our buddy Chris Christie would have been a better choice? Or do you think there could have been other choices that would have benefited the Trump team?
I think it was kind of brought up throughout multiple discussions tonight. The Pence is kind of like the level head of the ticket.
He's the anti-Trump.
Yeah, he kind of, to Trump's animation, he kind of balances out a little bit. So I think that was a pretty decent choice for Trump, just to kind of get in the non-Hoosier voters who see him, as Justin brought up, like the straight shot, like evangelical, great politician that people in Indiana might not see him as. So I think, personally, I think it was a pretty good choice for him to pick Governor Pence.
Justin Hayes, thoughts on the whole Pence thing?
Yeah, with Pence, he is the evangelical, the traditional Republican values. I think Trump was trying to sweep up all of the traditional Republicans that he could through that safe bet of Pence, because Pence, they may disagree on some of their policies or their values, but I think when you have someone as shocking as Trump, you need someone to kind of reel people back in of, okay, here is a guy who sticks to the traditional values. He's against gay marriage. He's against the traditional values that people are like, Trump, he's kind of wishy-washy on these values, but Pence, they see him as the representative of the traditional Republican values.
Does anyone on this panel think that there would have been a better option than Pence?
Oh, clearly. I mean, maybe in retrospect now, but I think part of the job of the VP is to jump on a grenade for your candidate, right?
Yeah.
You are supposed to deflect and take bullets for your candidate, and I think Mike Pence has kind of shown he's not willing to do that.
No.
He will disagree with Trump openly in public. He will say, that I don't agree with Donald Trump. He never said that, and if he said that, I disagree.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think that he's willing to do the stuff that like Biden has done for Obama. Right? I think that's part of being a good vice president is taking those hits. And I think that if you had somebody like Newt Gingrich, I'm not saying that I want to see him in the White House. I'm just saying that if you had somebody like Newt Gingrich who doesn't have a lot more to lose, right? I think that you would see him jumping in front of trains for Trump. Whereas Pence, I think that he's focused on the next big election.
That's what I was going to say. Usually when the vice presidency, when the ticket loses, pretty much the next one everyone looks at is the vice president from that party. That's what we did with, I think, John Edwards in 2008. That's what we did with Paul Ryan in 2016. We were looking for them. Do you think Pence is gearing up for 2020? Justin, I saw you wanted to say something.
I think Pence originally was gearing up for 2016, but when the religious freedom bill came out in Indiana and it got brought to the national light how discriminatory he was, that it kind of put him on the back burner for a presidential run. And I think when he saw this opportunity to be Donald Trump's vice president nominee, I think he saw it as an opportunity to get back in the front runners for that presidential nomination.
Do you, sorry to
Yeah,
cut it
go
off,
ahead.
but just to throw it out to the panel, do you think that if he had rejected the vice presidential nomination and was running in Indiana for governor, do you think he would make it? Or do
He
you think
wouldn't.
it would be a
No.
close race?
For
If-
governor? No.
Not at all.
I think if you look at polling data that happened before he became the vice presidential nominee, I think he was losing by high single digits, so about 8 or 9 points. He would not have made it.
So I think there's a reason why he courted that
Yeah.
nomination. The writing was on the wall for Hoosiers.
Yeah.
And I think that he needed that as a second act revival.
Yeah.
And
I think at least for the Republican side for 2020, if Trump loses, the two to watch will probably be Cruz and Pence. I think that both of them are probably gearing up for runs in 2020, from what I understand, from what I can see.
Nate, thoughts on the whole 2020 race? Even though we haven't had the 2016
No, it's still
race.
2016.
well, but I feel like Pence is looking forward to 2020.
Yeah.
Right, or 2024. I think that he's.
I think everyone is looking forward to 2020,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Kanye
It-
2020.
I don't think Kane is. I really don't think that Kane is trying to get in line.
No, I don't think
No.
so. He's about like Biden right now. Biden probably if he felt like he needed to, he would do it. But
A quick little side story. I think Nate Wade is the only one that knows this. But do you remember where we were when Joe Biden
Yes.
said he was not
Yes.
going to run?
We were in Boston on the train. Jose was not too happy about that.
I was
Picture
almost in
saved.
tears.
I have a picture saved somewhere for if the panel wants to see it after.
can we post that online?
We can.
We're posted online. I looked very depressed when I heard that Joe Biden was not going to run, and I still am kind of sad about that. So why don't we move on to the conversation of the vice presidency? What is the role of the vice presidency? Does it matter? Jordan, as a political science professor, can you maybe give us a quick overview of how the vice presidency has changed over time?
So the thing about the vice presidency is that it is one of the least discussed official roles in the U.S. Constitution. There are only two really official mentions of any role that the vice presidency plays. One is that he has to preside over the Senate, and if the Senate were to vote and they were in a tie, he would have to break the tie. And then the final one is in the 25th Amendment, where it sets up the presidential line of succession. If the president were to resign or die or become incapacitated in office, it would be the vice president that takes over. And so, at least if you look at over time, it has been one of those positions in the federal government that has really changed due to, or at least according to, what the administration needs. So, for instance, if you look at our first vice president, John Adams, he was very much outside of the administration. He wasn't anywhere near anything when it came to deciding what George Washington wanted to decide. It was always the cabinet. He was never present in cabinet meetings. He was always very much outside. He was just there to preside over the Senate, sit there, look pretty, that sort of thing. Whereas in other administrations, you see that changes quite a bit. For instance, Lyndon Johnson was needed in the Kennedy administration for his relationships on Capitol Hill. He had been Senate Majority Leader and been the senator from Texas since probably about the first Johnson administration, which was in 1864. But and he was needed to really bring that political capital to get Kennedy's policies passed through Congress. And that's what you kind of see, at least right now, with the Obama administration. Why did President Obama choose Joe Biden? He needed that prestige. He needed those relationships on Capitol Hill that he didn't have. And so in one aspect, it's what, at least when it comes to the administrative part itself, the vice president's role is what the administration needs. If they need somebody with prestige, they need someone with prestige. If they need somebody to sit there, smile, and look pretty, they'll get somebody to smile and look pretty. Electorally, there's been some argument that when you choose somebody to run for vice president, that you're trying to balance something on the ticket. So, for instance, if you look for geography, if you choose somebody from the north, you choose somebody from the south for your vice president. If you choose somebody from the East Coast, you choose somebody from the West Coast. If you choose somebody from the Midwest, you choose somebody from wherever is the opposite of the Midwest, sort of thing. You get somebody who's, an outsider, you get an insider as their vice president, those sorts of things. So you're trying to balance out the ticket. And so if you look at the vice presidency over time, it has been something that changes with each president that's elected. Even to some cases where you don't have a vice president, like in the Ford administration, where they didn't have one for 2 years.
So I think my question is, is the vice presidency necessary? Right here we have an article from The Atlantic where the topic is, does the vice presidency matter? So I just want to get your guys' thoughts on kind of the article and, on the topic, does the vice presidency matter, or how important it is to yourself? So let's start off with, I guess, Justin Hayes. Thoughts on the whole vice presidency, does it matter, or does it only matter when it needs to matter?
Yeah, I really think that is a great point, that it only matters when it does need to matter. If the president can get the job done himself and doesn't need to utilize the strengths of the vice president, then the vice president will kind of fade to the back. But if he needs the vice president to be maybe an attack dog or maybe utilize relationships that are needed, then yes, the person will be sent out to utilize those relationships. But I think that is a good point, that the vice president is basically just needed where he or she needs to be needed, and if not, then it just gets to be the vice president and just kind of hang out.
Justin, do you have thoughts on the issue?
I would agree that with the statement that the vice presidency is only necessary when it's necessary. But I think part of the reason that the vice presidency hasn't been given a greater amount of power or a greater say in things is because there's a lot of gray area in the Constitution. For example, the only thing under the executive branch is the president. It never says anything about the vice president being involved in the executive branch. That's why up until, I forget what year it was, but it wasn't until quite recently that the vice president even had an office in the executive branch due to the Constitution not actually giving them any of that power. So I think a lot of it is that presidents don't really want to cause a scandal early on in their presidency by giving the vice president a lot of executive power when the Constitution doesn't really say that they're allowed to have any.
Jordan, I see your head nodding up and down. Thoughts?
There's that great quote about the vice presidency basically not being worth a bucket of warm piss. Is that the direct quote? So, I mean, I think that's kind of the stereotype of the vice presidency, is that you're playing second fiddle. It's pretty thankless, and that's what makes Veep an entertaining show, is showing just how dysfunctional the relationship could be. Now, I think once people realized how much leverage you could get with the vice president, though, and I agree with Justin, that utilizing that person, the connections, what they're doing, I think that has made the role more valuable. Now, is it valuable for the person being in that role? Absolutely not. It's valuable for the president who's tapping that person for the role. And I think that was part of what was going on with Biden. Was he comfortable with his legacy that he was leaving under Obama, or did he want to try and break out on his own? And I think he realized that under Obama, he's a popular guy. He's a well-liked guy. And I think that's partially why he might have decided not to run, because he already was seen as this kind of affable elder statesman. And I think that he's kind of going out on a high note. So maybe he did get something out of the vice presidency. It wasn't necessarily policy, but he got to be kind of a sounding board for the nation. And I think that probably is a little bit valuable.
Jordan?
Well, I think that if you look at Joe Biden, at least, I think that he did get some things out of it. He was the one who was able to kind of push the president in ways that perhaps the president wasn't able to, didn't feel comfortable doing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, the discussions of gay marriage. It was Biden that kind of forced President Obama's hand when he said, yeah, I'm okay with it. The president wouldn't necessarily be able to say that until he had somebody to force his hand in that way.
I feel like since we're older than the rest of the panel, is that for us, we remember that was a monumental moment. And it seems like a very, very small moment for a president to come out and say, I'm okay with gay marriage, right? Because every president uniformly beforehand had been against. To have somebody even just come out and go, yeah, I'm okay with it, was a major shift in the dynamics. And I think that's why you see 2 years later, 3 years later, there are massive changes across the board. And I think you're right. With Biden's hand in that, you're right. He had a major change in the fabric of society, and he's not going to get credit for it. Nobody's going to put up a Biden statue in front of the Supreme Court, but I don't know. Maybe that's fine.
Justin?
Speaking of another vice president, I just want to get the older generation in our panel's thoughts on Dick Cheney. How I remember Dick Cheney is he's the war hawk, and I think he played an important role in the invasion of Iraq. And I just want to know if that is an accurate portrayal of what was going on at the time when the U.S. was about to invade Iraq. Was Dick Cheney?
Oh yeah,
We're not that old.
yeah.
I know.
I was in high school, so it's not exactly.
But I mean, yeah, he was. I mean, if there was ever an insider vice president, it was Dick Cheney. He was. He had served in Congress. He had been. I think it was Secretary of Defense. I'm going to look at Rowdy Jeff for a little bit.
For under Bush.
Under Bush 1, he was Secretary of Defense. I think he had also been a few other things.
Was he Chief of Staff also?
I think he might have been.
Maybe Chief of Staff or something.
He's been a few other things in the federal government, and so he's basically the ultimate insider. So he knew how to talk to the Defense Department, how to talk to state about how to get the invasion of Iraq going. And there's one narrative that you could look at. It's the movie W by our wonderful friend and conspiracy theorist Oliver Stone. That basically Dick Cheney was the one who was pushing this, preeminent, action kind of doctrine that became the Bush doctrine, that if there are threats that might happen, we should preempt them with military action.
I was going to say, though, that Cheney, in the election, and this is how I remember it, I mean, I granted was still like, driving around like a 92 Mercury Sable at the time, but at the time, it was seen as George W. was a bit of a partier. He was a freewheeler. He was an everyday guy that you'd want to go
He had
have a
done
beer
coke.
with. Yeah, and in order to try to complement, they found a guy that looked like an elder statesman. And I think that was the idea, is that you have somebody
Okay.
who is tied, right? Tied to it, that's going to keep this guy under control, right? Who's going to, Bush may not be up on all the topics himself, but he'll surround himself with people that are. And it was harder to get a more distinguished pedigree, right?
Then Dick Cheney.
Than Cheney at the time.
So so at least those of you who are younger, then what was your
Right.
perception of the Penguin? I mean, Dick Cheney.
I mean, I've kind of come across this myself, and I've seen it in multiple articles and polls that have kind of compared Joe Biden's role with Obama to Dick Cheney's role with Bush. Kind of like what Jordan said, how he brought some experience, he brought some of the insider help that either Bush, young Bush, or Obama might not have had because of their I don't want to say lack of experience, indicating that they didn't have any experience at all, but because they weren't around, they hadn't been around the block like Cheney or
They didn't have the
Biden
political
had.
capital.
I guess the next question I want to pose is a one-word answer for now. But who was your favorite, or who do you think is the best vice president that we've had? So I guess we'll start with Justin. Just go down the line with one-word answers, and then we'll discuss it.
John Adams.
I might go LBJ.
I think I'm gonna go Nixon.
I'm just going recency. I'm saying Biden.
Honestly, I have to go with Biden too.
Wow. Okay, interesting. There were some interesting names out there. So I think we've talked about Biden, but let's talk about Nixon. Nate, why Nixon?
It was a tough choice. I was thinking LBJ a lot, and I was thinking Biden a lot. But I mean, I think Nixon was kind of like the first VP to really have more of a role in the executive. He sat in on the National Security Councils. He sat in on the cabinet, and when Eisenhower was, whether it was his heart attack, his stroke, or if he was just absent at the time, he kind of chaired those. I think it stood out to me because he kind of set, I don't know if I'd say set a precedent, but he kind of he set a monument, I guess, where he took something that hadn't been done with the VP necessarily, and he kind of headed it. This was before the 25th Amendment had been ratified. There was no precedent for, okay, the president had a heart attack. He's out for 6 weeks. He had a stroke. He's out. There's no precedent, and he kind of went in, and I don't think he necessarily tried to seize all the power, and he kind of kept the cabinet from trying to seize any takeover. Or he kind of kept everything calm, collected, and running while the president was out.
Jordan, you said Johnson,
No. Well, yeah.
right?
Yeah. LBJ.
LBJ. Okay.
First, yeah. We're going way back.
So, you said, okay, so Justin Meredith said Adams. You said LBJ. You said Nixon. You just talked about Nixon. You said Nixon. They were all presidents, too. Does that play a role in your decision making when you said that?
I love a good Cinderella story. Yeah. I mean, and to be fair, I think that it's a bit of a cliche now, but certainly for my parents' generation, the assassination of Kennedy was their 9/11. I mean, it was something unthinkable that occurred to a popular president with a beautiful family, and to be able to take the country after that and move it in some of the same policy directions, right? In some ways, he's kind of a terrible person, where he kind of used Kennedy's death as political capital to forward an agenda. But on the same way, I mean, that's kind of what you would want as a president for your vice president to do, to hit the ground running, to use what he can to get there. And I think that, for me, I mean, there's a lot of presidents that have, like, I could go back to Coolidge if I wanted to go for, vice presidents. But I don't know, I feel like in our modern era, that's one that I don't think that there's another vice president that's been alive since that really could have taken that and transferred it over.
Jordan?
Well, I think I might have to change my vote. And
No, your vote stays with Biden.
fine. If I had to choose another one,
Do you want to swap? Can I swap? I'll do Biden and you.
Well, if I had to choose another one, I would say it would probably be Truman.
Okay.
Truman, because honestly, no one would expect that Truman would have been able to have gotten things done in World War II like Roosevelt had. And so it was just that kind of what you see with Johnson, what you see with all of these other, basically some of the other vice presidents who have taken over, is that it's a seamless transition to where, okay, Roosevelt started this, let's finish it.
I mean, can you imagine Dan Quayle coming out and like forwarding it? Like, that wouldn't have happened. Like, that wouldn't
The
have
Dan
happened.
Quayle that doesn't know how to spell potato. Yeah, Dad, that's our vice president, the only one from Indiana. Well, no, I think the only one from Indiana, Dan
Yeah.
Quayle, unless God intercedes and it's a Trump-Pence administration.
Jesus, take the wheel.
For me, I didn't answer, but I do want to say it. I think my favorite vice presidency, I'm not quite. It's more about the journey than about the destination.
Oh, good.
But my favorite one, it has to be Jerry Ford. There was a vacancy. Nixon put him there, and a couple months later, that man became president without anyone voting for him. So that's just my favorite vice presidency story. Last thing about vice presidents, I know a lot of us watch television and movies. All right, so out of television and movies, who is your favorite vice president? Let's start over again. Let's start on this side with Jordan. Favorite vice president, one-word answers, and then we'll discuss it.
Favorite fictional vice president? I would have to say probably Hoynes
From the West Wing.
from The West Wing, yeah.
The Frank Underwood.
I'm gonna have to go with Francis Joseph Underwood, the man.
I would say Selena Meyer from Veep.
Hands down, Frank Underwood.
And I'm going to have to agree with Jordan Daylong here. Mine is Selena Meyer also. So let's talk very briefly about Frank Underwood. What makes him a good vice president?
Well,
Was he a good vice
What
president?
doesn't make him a good vice president?
That's the real question here.
Was he a good vice president? That's up for
I played
heavy
the- I played the
debate.
fifth.
Was he a great politician? Yeah, he knew how to get things done. He knew how to work his way. He had a master plan since he was denied his coveted spot, and he worked his way into the presidency.
From the majority whip.
Yeah.
This just be like spoiler free.
Spoiler alert.
As
for all
someone
those
who
listening.
has been avoiding House of Cards because I'm waiting for the end so I can binge it all at once, just all at once.
Yeah, we actually have Jeff Brewster here too, who is kind of our IT person for this
Really,
podcast.
Jeff?
Jeff, I'm sorry, but do you have a favorite vice president and or fictional vice president?
My favorite, probably real vice president is actually Al Gore. I mean, I think he probably should have been president, not for a Supreme Court decision. And I also met him personally, and I liked him. And I think he was one of the more, I think Clinton used him a lot as kind of a sounding board and as more of a policy person.
And we all love the internet.
Yeah, and he invented the internet, so which is
And
actually not true.
He's also looking for Man Bear Pig, which is a great service,
Yeah.
great friggin' service to humanity.
And I think my favorite fictional would be Hoynes from West Wing, because I just love that show. I think everybody on that show is, I mean, even if they're not the nicest people. But
Is that on Netflix?
So let's talk about, real quick, briefly about John Hoynes. What makes him the ideal vice president? And there's actually, I think, 2 vice presidents in that show. We have John Hoynes, and then we have
Bingo Bob.
Bingo Bob, who is actually
Bob Russell.
Bob Russell. I keep on wanting to say Matt Santos, but that's the other. He actually ran for president. So yeah, so why John Hoynes?
Well, I think that it goes down to just the relationship that Hoynes and Josiah Bartlett have. I mean, these are 2 former rivals. They had both been in the Democratic primary, at least in the universe of the show, and Bartlett beats Hoynes pretty badly by the end. It's a fairly tough race, and in order to get Hoynes on, what's his face? Bartlett tells Hoynes his illness and says, "Will you be my vice president?" And there's one reason why Bartlett chooses Hoynes. It's not because he wants to make amends. It's not because he wants to. He thinks that he's going to compliment him on the ticket at all. It's because he thinks that should something happen to Bartlett because of his multiple sclerosis, he is the best person to take the job.
Jordan, you agreed with me, Selena Meyer. I'm a big fan of the show also. Why her?
I think because I love the West Wing as well, but I occasionally see government as a farce. I was a big fan of the other Armando Iannucci stuff that he had done, especially like The Thick of It, right? And that kind of cynical and profane view of politics, for some reason, always gets me entertained. And I think Julia Louis-Dreyfus just nails the anxiety and the hopefulness and the just duplicity of kind of what modern politics is, right? One second you're holding up a baby, and the next second you're just wiping your hands down with as much sanitizer as you can. And I mean, that's the reality of it. It's almost a superhuman thing that we expect politicians to live up to. And I think she put some kind of humor and humanity to it, so I always find it fun.
Now that, I kind of want to just segue into this last, short little segment here, but I'm just receiving some word about Hurricane Matthew. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are watching Florida as closely as a homeowner, hoping that Hurricane Matthew won't destroy the political infrastructure they've built. It says that the storm is to be the strongest storm in more than a decade, and it's set to hit Florida tonight. And it's poised to shake up the campaigns with just 33 days remaining in the election. I know the Clinton campaign has urged Florida officials to extend the state's October 11th voter registration deadline, and I just received word that Florida Governor Rick Scott denied the request to extend the state's voter registration deadline on account of Hurricane Matthew. Real quick also, when it comes to the history of natural disasters during elections, James Madison had a slow discovery of a Missouri earthquake, and Benjamin Harrison's had a personal check with 2,200 Pennsylvania flood victims. And then we see George H.W. Bush's slow response to Hurricane Andrew. So how do you think Hurricane Matthew will impact this election for Florida specifically?
I think it'll depend on the response of not only the candidates. I mean, if the candidates go down there, if they start to, help out, I think that will help them out quite a bit. It'll help humanize, especially Trump and Hillary. But I think it'll also depend on the response that the president has. because that's one of the things that helped Obama quite a bit in 2012 with his response to Hurricane Sandy. Let's face it, one of the kind of touching moments of the 2012 campaign was his bro hug with Chris Christie on the tarmac in New Jersey. And so what's going to happen is that either if Obama has a really good response, that's going to be great. However, if he doesn't, Hillary's going to have to go on the defensive because of Obama's slow response to this disaster.
Well, I think beyond that as well, I think that Trump has a lot more to lose here just because of the way the electoral math is shaping up, right? Florida is always an important state. However, this election, right, if Trump loses Florida,
That's the ballgame.
It's just game over,
Yeah.
right, at that point in time. So any sort of flub, any sort of misspeak, anything that seems inauthentic, right, is really going to just torch him, right? And so I think that for me, if we see the same type of thing where Trump's rolling up his arms and like helping flood victims out, I consider that completely inauthentic, right? There's no way that I'm going to see that and go, oh yeah, that's the Donald Trump that's been presented, right? So I think he's got more to lose here than he does to gain.
Yeah, I want to get responses from either Justin Hayes, Justin Meredith, or Nate. Just thoughts on how this hurricane can play out for the Florida election.
Well, I thought it was interesting this relevant about Rick Scott's decision to not delay the registration or extend it.
Uh-huh.
I think that
As
many
we know,
people.
Rick Scott is a Republican.
Yeah, so he has a lot to gain, or I guess he's not going to really hear Hillary Clinton's side for wanting to extend it. But I think, of course, people aren't going to be worried about registering to vote now until the deadline. They're going to worry about their homes, their property, and being safe. So I think that, I don't know the legality and the rules behind whether to extend the deadline or not, but I think that plays an interesting part in that. I think it's kind of unfair.
Justin, Nate, thoughts?
I mean, obviously there's political intentions behind Rick Scott's decision. I'm not 100% sure which way, if it was leaning which way right now, off the top of my head. But I feel like, if you go back to I believe it was the 2000 election, how important Florida was in that vote.
On how close it was,
Yeah.
too.
I feel like it would be beneficial, especially for the Clinton campaign, if the registration deadline did get pushed back. But I don't know. I guess we'll see how this decision plays out, since they're not obviously focused on if they're registered or not.
Justin, I see you have your hand up.
A CNBC poll of registered voters in Florida show in a head-to-head matchup, Hillary leads by 3 to 4 points, and in a four-way matchup with Jill Stein and Gary Johnson added in, she still leads by 2.4 points over Trump. And I think that if the deadline isn't extended, it might actually help her in the long run, if that's the case, because it essentially freezes where voters are at, in a sense.
But that kind of goes against the conventional wisdom, though, because the problem is that when you have high voter registration, that usually means that Democrats are going to do better. Because if you think about the demographics, Democrats are more likely to be more mobile. Republicans are more sedentary over time, and so it might hurt her, at least possibly in the long run, but in the short run, she can make a lot of hay out of this. I think, the fact that Rick Scott might be insensitive to voters fleeing, trying to in a presidential election, making a sort of political stunt out of this. But
Well, and I was going to say as well that I think it matters too if you look at homes and whose homes are typically damaged, right, in storms like this, and who it affects. And I think disproportionately it's going to be voters that don't have, right, buildings that are quite up to every sort of standard. It's going to
Mhm.
be people renting in, kind of other places. It's not that hurricanes only affect people, but I think they differentially affect the lives of people who can't instantly rebuild or don't have the same types of insurance. So I think it could make a pretty sizable difference, right, if people are trying to put their lives back together after a storm of the decade. I mean, it's yet to make landfall, correct?
It has made actually, well, hasn't made landfall in Florida, but it has
Yeah,
made
Cuba.
landfall in Cuba and Haiti. And Haiti's government, the Interior Minister just released the numbers that 264 people have died from the earthquake. So if you're in Florida or know families in Florida, keep in contact with them over the next couple hours, and they will be in our thoughts as the next couple days continue. So thank you for listening and viewing this episode of Party Animals. We discussed the 2016 vice presidential debate. We've also discussed the importance, unimportance of the vice presidential debates, and also discussed kind of the good and the bad of being vice president, and then finally ended on how Hurricane Matthew is going to play a role in this election, specifically to Florida. So thank you again to Justin Meredith, Jordan Daylong, Nate Wade, Justin Hayes, Jordan Lising, and Jeff Brewster for being a part of this show. And tune in next time to hear more from Party Animals.